Children, in order to discuss the immediate and long term problems related to the environment and to find solutions on them, a United Nations Conference on Human Environment was called out Stockholm from 5th to 16th June 1972. In this conference, it was stressed that it is the responsibility of all nations to cooperate to overcome pollution. The developing nations feel that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of the environment and they should take the responsibility for stopping the decline. Even today, the developing countries take the same position. Children, another feature of this conference was that the non governmental organizations working in the field of environmental protection were also present. The issue of the protection of the common global wealth was raised. A consensus emerged that it was the responsibility of all the nations to protect these resources. It was after this conference that the United Nations created the United Nations Environment Programme. Many international treaties about environment were signed after this conference. Several rules were made about the protection of environment. Environmental movements started on a large scale at national as well as at the international level. Non-governmental organizations also assumed a bigger role in the decision-making process at international conferences regarding the environment. Children, the next stage was the environmental conference at Rio in 1992. In this conference, the idea of sustainable development was stressed. Different treaties regarding biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, protection of forests, etc., were signed. In 1997, the Conference of Kyoto laid down the protocols for the developed countries for preventing climate change. These were applicable for 15 years. After this, a conference on climate change was held at Paris in November 2015. An appeal was made in this conference that all nations should make concerted efforts to stop climate change and global warming, and that the developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve these goals. So, children, about Stockholm Conference, you came to know that United Nations Conference on Human Environment took place at Stockholm from 5th and 16th June 1972. It discussed the immediate and long-term problems related to the environment and to solution to them. It was pointed out that it is the responsibility of all nations to cooperate to overcome pollution. The developing nations pointed out that the developed nations are more responsible for the decline of the environment. Children, after this conference, United Nations Environmental Program was created. Several international treaties were signed and rules were laid down for the protection of the environment. So, children, all these points are discussed in Stockholm Conference. Now, here also you have come to know about Rio De Janeiro Conference, that is, the environmental movement started on a large scale and at national as well as international level. The non-governmental organization assumed bigger role in decision-making process at international conference. At the Rio de Janeiro Conference in 1992, the concept of sustainable development was discussed. Different treaties on biodiversity, climate change due to greenhouse gases, protection of forests, etc., were signed. Children, also I have discussed about Kyoto Conference. At the Kyoto Conference in 1997, a 15-year protocol on prevention of climatic changes for developed countries was adopted. And then the Paris Conference, the conference on climate change, was held in Paris in 2015. Children, it was appealed and was agreed that all nations should make concerted efforts to stop climate change and global warming. The developed countries should help the developing countries to acquire the technology to achieve of these goals. So children, all these points are discussed here in Stockholm, then the Rio de Janeiro, Kyoto Conference, and at last you have come to know about Paris Conference. Now I am going to discuss what is terrorism. Children, terrorism is a major problem of our times. Several countries in the world are facing this problem. No nation is capable of countering terrorism entirely by its own. Hence, terrorism is considered to be a global problem. Terrorism is spreading fear and terror in a society by using or threatening to use violence against common and innocent people for achieving political goods. Terrorism is organized and planned violence. Terrorism has made a deep and long-term impact on international politics. It, the last two decades, in the last 2 decades, terrorist conflict appears to have intensified in different countries. Terrorist conflict is different from traditional war. Traditional war is a conflict between two or more sovereign states. In such words, the geographical boundaries between nations acquire importance. That is, national security is connected with geographical boundaries. On the other hand, in the case of terrorism, terrorist groups can cause the violence of any part of the world from anywhere in the world. The aim of the terrorist attack is no endanger the geographical boundaries, but to challenge a regime in a country or refuse to acknowledge the existence of the state. This means that due to increasing terrorism and internal security of a country is threatened in addition to its external security. So, children, about terrorism, what have you come to know? That terrorism is spreading fear and terror in a society by using or threatening to use violence against common people for achieving political goals. Then you have come to know it is organized and planned violence. Terrorist conflict is different from traditional war. Traditional war is a conflict between two or more sovereign states. In such wars, the geographical boundaries between nations acquire importance. On the other hand, terrorist groups can cause wherein an sorry children. On the other hand, terrorist groups can cause violence in any part of the world from anywhere in the world. The aim of a terrorist attack is to challenge the regime of a country and refuse to acknowledge the existence of the state. It is imperative that the security mechanisms of different nations should work in a concerted manner to curb terrorism, and also terrorism is a major problem which has intensified in different countries in the last 2 decades, and also several countries are facing, and no country is with the help capable of countering it on its own. So, children, all these points related to terrorism are discussed. Then, now I am going to discuss about the problems of refugees.